So let's get the cards going now. And if you've already decided who you're going to vote for in the mayoral election, would you raise your green card now? Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a look at the undecideds then, the red cards. Okay, I would say there's all to play for then. Excellent. So tonight we'll be hearing from Tom Baldwin of the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, Kay Barnard from the Liberal Democrats, Tony Dyer from the Green Party, George Ferguson, Independent, Marvin Rees from the Labour Party, Paul Saville, Independent, Christine Townsend, Independent, and Paul Turner from the UK Independence Party. And just so you know, there's no rigging of how we've done this. The candidates are actually sitting in alphabetical order. Right, so on to the candidate statements. You have 1 minute 30 seconds each candidate, and I'm not going to take these out of the hat. I'm actually going to do this alphabetically. So, Tom.
Do you want me to stand or stay seated?
I think you're going to have to stay seated for the microphone.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I'm standing for the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition. That was founded in 2010 and was set up to give a voice back to ordinary people, because we've had a tough time over the last few years while the rich have got richer. We've faced austerity, huge cuts to the jobs and services that we rely on. In Bristol, that's been over £100 million cut from the council budget in the last few years. And we are standing in order to stop and to reverse those cuts. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that they have hit women hardest. Whether it be specific cuts proposed to sexual and domestic violence services, whether it be the fact that women make up 3/4 of local government workforces and therefore are disproportionately hit by the job cuts, or the indirect effects of the cuts as well, the fact that women disproportionately pick up the caring responsibilities when those are cut from the council. And while the others would say that government cuts must be passed on, then we disagree. This is a weak government. They were beaten on disability benefits, and we think they can be beaten on this as well. So we would move a budget that's based on what this city needs, starting with reversing the cuts already made, not on the cuts that Osborne is demanding, and then build the campaign that is needed to win back the funding that's been stolen from the city. We don't want to just limit ourselves to not losing anything more. We want to make things better, but I'm going to have to wait until later to explain more about that. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, it's like I can hear it's working. Well, it's great to be here, isn't it, with an audience of almost exclusively women. I've seen a few male faces. It's strange and disheartening to be one of only 2 female candidates out of 13, and I'm the only one from a major political party. Thank you, yes. The woman who triggered me to become active in politics was not in a positive way. It was Mrs. Thatcher, because I couldn't stand what was going on in the 1980s. Right. I grew up in an all-female household. My mum was a single parent and I had 2 sisters. And what that meant was I had no preconceptions about role models, and that was a huge advantage. So I chose science, and there's not enough of us. There are not enough women in science and engineering altogether, and something that needs addressing. I chickened out of becoming a civil engineer because I couldn't face the thought of being the only woman in a class of 100. Anyway, I was lucky to have support from men, both my husband and a mentor at the University of Bristol. But it's not been an easy ride. I have faced outright discrimination and sexual harassment of various sorts. And so I absolutely pledge to promote fair treatment and opportunities for all women in every way in Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Let me start by saying I'm very proud to be the Green Party candidate. I'm very proud of being a member of a party which uniquely is the only national party in the UK where a female leader was followed by another female leader. It's astonishing that that's taken so long for that to happen in this country. I'm also proud of the fact that we have a 50-50 gender split in our councillors at the moment, and we're looking to reproduce that in the forthcoming elections. But it's not just about numbers. Numbers are part of it, but it's about how we change the real issue of ensuring that women have a much stronger voice in all the corridors of power and society. Yesterday most of us were at Hustings for people with disabilities, and one of the things that was discussed was the social model of disability, where society is designed to place barriers in front of people with disabilities. We have to face up to the reality that society is also designed to place barriers in front of women to prevent them from getting a fair share in society. We have to face up to the fact that we have a culture which approaches or has an effect on women or displays them in such a way that encourages a culture of bias. We need to change that, and we all need to work together to make that change.
Thank you. George.
Thanks, Penny, and it's great to be at the biggest hustings to date, and I think probably the best. And let's be clear, equality of women and men is a fundamental human right. And if we claim to be a civilized society, we must be intolerant of discrimination and disadvantage, and we must eliminate it. And as Mayor, I'm signed up to zero tolerance, not just regarding abuse, but over all forms of discrimination, which is why one of my first decisions was to invite Bristol Women's Voice, represented by Penny Gain and Diane Bunyan, to help set up and chair the Bristol Women's Commission, and to be the first UK city leader to sign the European Charter for Equality of Women and Men on International Women's Day 3 years ago. I've listened and I've learnt a lot. And I've supported all the principles espoused by the Women's Commission, which is very broadly based. I've acted when others have talked. I have 50-50 cabinet. I have a 50-50 collection of youth mayors, 8 of them, and to make sure our leaders of the future start as they mean to go on. So please judge me by my actions, not by my words.
Thank you. Marvin.
Hi, thanks for having me here this evening. Maybe just to say about my approach, fundamentally when I think about Bristol, I'm thinking about inequalities in power. And my approach to all issues of equality are about how do we redress the inequalities in political and economic power in Bristol. For me, the core question is one of leadership, and making sure the leadership we have in the city actually has the ability to look and think and understand the city in all its fullness. And for me, that the heart of that is having an approach that makes space for a wider range of people from a wider range of backgrounds to come forward and sit at the decision-making tables in Bristol. I came into politics myself through a programme that proactively sought out people that were underrepresented in political leadership. And I would like to extend that approach to all groups who are underrepresented in leadership in Bristol, and obviously women are a member of those groups. It's not just a moral issue. A very powerful paper just last year, produced by McKinsey, said that organisations with women at the senior leadership level are 15 to 18% more likely to outperform the markets. When we're accessing a diversity of thought, organisations make better decisions. What I would just say is, I think that we've got to put equality impact assessments at the front end of our policy making, not as a catch-up when we've done all the serious business. And I think that we need to mature our conversation about equalities. They are not top trumps. They are all true. And one story of equalities and inequality does not negate another one.
Okay, Paul Saville.
Okay, good evening. So a little bit about my story. I came into this mayoral race, if you like, mainly wanted to focus on housing and homelessness, having been homeless myself, once when I was 16 and once when I was 17, and then eventually ended up getting sectioned under the Mental Health Act at age 19. I was supported through the NHS, through the welfare benefit system, and through eventually the education system when I studied at UWE. So for me, it's in my blood to defend these institutions that will save my life. Really, I will keep telling people about how I would be either dead or in prison if those things hadn't helped me. It's nice to follow Marvin actually. He talks about equality and stuff, and it's really nice. I just want to say thank you to the organisers of this Hustings, who have actually taken the right decision to invite all candidates, well, nearly all of them. So thank you very much for that. Because we're not being invited to all the Hustings. There's a Hustings tomorrow for young people, for example, who aren't being invited to listen to all of the debates and the ideas. Independents are being shut out of that. So for me, I want to build a more transparent council. I want to talk about why the bosses at Bristol City Council are getting pay rises up to £196,000, whilst people down the bottom, including homeless people, etc., but just working everyday people, are having to face the cuts. For me, it's just, you have to have a political will. If someone's ready to do that, whoever's made mayor, thanks, stop.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm standing as an independent because I really want to try to ensure that our state education sector and what I believe to be social selection is on the table, and that it's discussed and it is brought and it's given some kind of political status. And what I've done is I've kind of prepared some statistics about, and I call it, we have this saying, a tale of two cities about Bristol, and I've called it a tale of two schools. And the two schools I'm going to highlight, hopefully, this analogy will enable you to understand what I'm talking about a bit more. So I'm talking about Bristol Cathedral Choir School, which is 5 minutes, kind of in that direction, and the City Academy, which is kind of 10 minutes down the cycle track. And the free school meal differences amongst the children that go to those schools are very stark. Cathedral Choir School has 7% of its children entitled to free school meals, whereas City Academy has 66% of its children entitled to free school meals. When it comes to children that speak English as a second language, the Cathedral Choir School has 2%. City Academy has 54%. At the Cathedral Choir School, when the children come in, 63% are high attainers. At the City Academy, 2% are high attainers. We need to end this, and it needs to be at the political debate, and we need to provide steer and political leadership for our councillors. Thank you.
And Paul Turner.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm Paul Turner. I'm the UKIP candidate. It's very difficult going right at the end of the line here, because what more can you say that hasn't already been said? Equal pay, equal opportunities, equal standing. Sadly, we do live in a society where that does not exist. But women do have so much to offer, so much more. And whenever I talk to women in the streets about politics, about mayoral elections, etc., it does always come up as to whether there should be a 50-50 split, men and women. Whether that be in the council or in the inner chamber of the mayor. And I always think to myself, well, why would you only want 50%? Surely we should be living in a society where women, the whole council could be women. Why not? Wouldn't it be so much better if all 70 councillors were women? I would certainly not have any objection to that whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much to the candidates for their views at the beginning. And we're going to move straight on to the questions from the audience. And the first question is submitted by Rachel Webb.
Hello, hi. zone has good quality, affordable childcare.
Thank you. Right, and we are starting with Paul Turner.
Yeah, I think it's essential to have not only good quality but affordable childcare, just to make sure that it's actually cost effective for women to actually go to work in the first place. If it's not affordable, then it defeats the whole object of it being there in the first place, really. Because if you can't afford to go out and work and also afford for childcare whilst you're working, then it's just completely defeated. So we have to make sure that it is cost effective and affordable. But you're absolutely right, Wilson, to make sure that the quality of care is there as well. And what I would like to do is make sure that the units that are set up to actually give the care have proper training, have proper understanding and knowledge of the situation. But we also need to make sure that the local authority is supported there with assisting with the funding, not only for the facilities, but for also the staff as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Christine.
So I think around childcare at the moment, those on low incomes get 15 hours free childcare. My understanding is that the Tories are proposing that that's increased to 30 hours. I support that particular proposal, but only if what it means is that though the parents then go out to work and the work that they're doing is meaningful for them. I do have concerns around very young children at the age of 2 and 3 being put into childcare for 30 hours a week, particularly when it comes to quality. Now, our children's centres are very good in Bristol, and generally they're quite good, but some of the quality of the childcare is not necessarily regulated quite as well as I would like to see. But Temple Key was the question. I know I want to see corporate responsibility. I'd like to see private business is part of the contracts that they put in to support working families. Thanks.
Thank you. Penny.
Yes, as I understand it, there's a huge shortage of nursery school places in Bristol, and that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. And as Christine said, it really is down to the larger companies to offer facilities for their staff in terms of creches where that's possible. I know the University of Bristol does that, and it certainly should be the norm for larger companies. But we need to make sure that the quality of the staff is good in those nursery schools and in the creches, and that they're paid well, because, yes, my own sister used to work in a nursery school, and I know she didn't get paid well. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Sargent.
Okay, yeah, so focusing on the Temple enterprise zone, I mean, I'm struggling to vision that down there, what that's going to be like once they finish with it. Anyway, but onto the childcare thing, yeah, I mean, like Christine said, it's about, well, I don't support corporations, I'm about local people, local businesses, but if, yeah, they have to have the corporate responsibility and they should be providing. But for me, it's part of a bigger inequality in Bristol. You know, that the fact is that some people don't even have that provision, and some people can't even afford to even get that and struggle with that every day. So, don't know if that answers it or not. There we go. Thanks.
Okay. George.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Childcare is expensive. I think the most practical way in a market system, which I don't have control of as mayor, is to work with the employers, and I'm drawing up a Fairer Bristol business charter and employment charter to get companies, and particularly tenderers, to sign up for, so if they are commissioned by the City Council in any way, that they will gain social value in that commissioning by signing up to good practice. So as far as the Temple Quarter Enterprise Zone is concerned, that's great opportunities for us as landowners there to use our power to condition some of the contracts to make sure that there is proper and affordable nursery provision.
Thank you. Marvin.
I think I'd like to start off just by understanding that this is not just a nice to have. This is about people, the full range of skills being available to Bristol's workforce and making sure that we understand it's not just a moral issue, it's an actually an economic performance issue. In terms of practicalities, yeah, we need to plan this into what we want Bristol to actually look like. One of the concerns I have is we often run down the road and accept whatever comes out or whatever process we go through. We need to be very intentional that we are a city that's going to make it possible for everyone to participate fully in the workforce. I think too we can look at our schools and look at breakfast clubs and supper clubs. There's a very interesting initiative launched nationally to look at how we can make better use of the pupil premium to support breakfast clubs and supper clubs to make sure that there's an extended school day making life more convenient for parents. And I would say, but the last thing I would also say is just about really understanding the drivers for childcare. I want it to be about choice and not just because people are so impoverished they actually have to have 2 wages just to be able to eat.
Thank you. Tony.
A couple of things very quickly. It is possible for a local authority to create something called a local list for new developments, and on that local list they can set conditions saying what they expect from any new developments, and that should include childcare provision. The second part of that is the council is one of the major purchasers of services and products from companies in Bristol. We should add it to as part of our procurement process, that we'll only procure services from those suppliers that also provide early years and childcare facilities. And finally, we need to set an example ourselves. I know at least one councillor who's no longer able to stand because of a lack of childcare facilities at Bristol City Council itself. We need to set, if we're going to ask others to provide these sort of services, then Bristol City Council itself has to be set in the lead and being the gold standard. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom.
Thank you. I think, as others have said, then providing childcare must be a condition of doing business in Bristol. But I think that's obviously not going to be available for everyone. We should look at council provision for those that need it. And the question, of course, then is raised how that's afforded. And I'll bring it back to the issues of austerity. And we have to campaign to win the funding that this city needs, and for things like childcare to be a higher priority than tax cuts for the rich, trident replacement and the other stuff that the government claim to be broke is spending our money on. I also think we should be looking at ways, including financial, of supporting those that do unpaid and undervalued caring work in the home. I think that's absolutely vital if we're going to move forward from looking at just this or that issue. That is one of the ways in which this society undervalues and oppresses women, and I think that has to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's everybody, isn't it? I haven't left anyone in the hat. No. Okay. I did once. So we're on to question 2, submitted by Mayoral Osborne.
Hello. On March the 15th, at the full council meeting, a unanimous yes vote was given to the motion for escalating the social housing banding for anyone fleeing domestic abuse in Bristol up to band 1, so that move on times are speeded up. What is your timescale to action being taken on the proposal, and when will the banding be changed? What other improvements could you make to services for domestic abuse in Bristol, especially regarding safe house provision?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and Tom, you're back again.
Okay. Well, I won't have time to write notes. I think it needs to be immediate. That decision is implemented. It's the correct decision to make. But I also think we need to look at the amount of council housing that the council has to offer. I think for everyone in the city, there's a growing housing crisis now, and addressing the supply of houses that are owned by us so that we can guarantee low rents, secure lifetime tenancies, good quality accommodation is absolutely vital. Because yes, it's important that those fleeing domestic violence are high up the priority list, but we also need a list that's able to be worked on, rather than a list that's just a very, very long list, because there's nowhere for those people to go. In terms then of safe havens and stuff like that. There was Women's Aid did a survey, and there was 6,500 people turned away from refuges. For those that answered, that was about a third of the ones that they asked that answered. That's 20,000 women potentially that were turned away. We need to increase the funding for those services. Cheers.
Thank you. Marvin.
So I did go to see an organisation, a very well-known organisation, I won't mention their name, that works with women, and I had out of the result of that, some of the most abused and exploited women in the city, led to a pledge that we would put women into that top band, women fleeing domestic violence and abuse. And I have personal experience of having lived in a refuge, so I know some of the insecurities that come when you don't have housing insecurity, both for the mother and for the children fleeing. So I would just say this needs to be an immediate priority. Until we get in, I can't say how that would work itself through the council bureaucracy, but I made a pledge about it because I want it to be an immediate priority. I think around that we have to be very intentional about what we want our voluntary sector and support organisations to look like in Bristol. I think we've left it up to the market, but many of our VCS organisations work with people in ways that the big providers cannot or will not. Essential. Alongside that, we need to build homes, and we need to make it possible for housing associations to build homes.
Paul Savin.
Great. So on the banding thing, in a more general sense as well, I think that whole system of how it's worked out is actually wrong, and it needs a whole system rehaul really. One of my backdrops about this homeless thing is that actually at any one time in the city we have over 1,000 homes empty right at this moment all over Bristol. On Saturday they're going to be auctioning off more council homes, some in St Paul's, some in Easton. So if you can make the demo on Saturday at the auction house in Clifton, of all places. Is it Saturday? Sorry, Wednesday. Again, my dates are all mixed up at the moment in my head. If you can make that, ask me afterwards and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But those are our homes actually, and we need to get those into public use for these things. But for me, it's more than just not for sale. It's more than just putting people in homes. What I'm interested in is building community housing where people can live together, and I'm talking about women's refuges where people can support each other and actually rebuild their lives, not just put them in somewhere to live. Thanks.
Turner.
It definitely needs to be implemented immediately. We need to make sure that, as Paul said, that the existing accommodation is across the city that's just not being used. Much of it just needs a little bit of TLC before it can become quite habitable. We need to get that sorted out. Council houses, we need to build a lot more than has been built over the last 30 years. We do need to involve the loads of housing associations, as Monica said, and we do need to make safe havens, especially for people, for those who have been victims of domestic abuse. But we also need to make sure there is the support there to help and make sure that they are safe and that they can actually live a life as opposed to just being put in a house, which sadly happens all too often. People get put into a home somewhere and they're expected to just carry on without having any degree of support, any degree of help or any degree of assistance with that.
Thank you. Kay. Thanks very much. Yes, absolutely. This should have been done, and it was a legal requirement according to someone very knowledgeable that I spoke to about this. So it's shocking that it wasn't already in place, that women who had experienced domestic violence should have been put at the top of the housing list. There are more issues actually about council housing. One issue is tenancies of council houses. Sometimes the tenancy is in the name of the man. If he ends that tenancy, the wife and family end up homeless. And the same also applies for shared tenancies, where the one partner can threaten to end the tenancy and then it is ended. And that is a means of coercion, particularly against women, and can be done as a form of vengeance by a disillusioned partner. So that really needs sorting out, and that's one of the things that I would insist that the council staff took extremely seriously. I know of 2 cases that have come to one of our councillors in South Bristol, and he has made great effort to make sure things are sorted on the part for the women.
Thank you very much. Christine.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to add then is around domestic violence support services and the importance of making sure that the children get the therapeutic support that they need if they've witnessed or indeed experienced that and they've been in the household. We know from the statistics that children are very aware when there's domestic violence in the house. But I'm also coming from a prevention perspective. I'm a teacher. I want to see Bristol Ideal much higher up on the list when it comes to our schools. I think we need to be ensuring that all of our schools provide safe spaces for our children and our young people to be able to discuss this issue. Because unless we bring our children together as males and females and discuss domestic violence and gender inequality, we're going to be here, unfortunately, in 30 years talking about the same thing. Thank you.
Tony.
Okay, a couple of things to add on to what's already been said. One of the things at the moment is only about 5 refugees in Bristol. We need to supply more because we have a growing population, and unfortunately the situation is going to be that with a growing population there's likely to be further demand. Also, we need to make sure that there is an oversupply. The reason why we need an oversupply is so that if there is a need for somebody to be placed somewhere for their own safety, that there is no waiting, that they can have somewhere to go to straight away. We also need to look at rents that are set. At the moment we have people who are paying rents at house level. It needs to be per room. And it's hay level for that is something like £70 per room. That will then mean that people who are placed in refugees do not have to then give up their jobs in order to pay their benefits, so you can still carry on trying to create a new life for themselves. And we also have to work cross boundary, because in some cases just being moved somewhere else in Bristol may not be remote enough and safe enough.
George.
Thank you, Mayoral. I welcome this coming to the council meeting in March. It raised awareness, and I supported it. And the last 12 months we have been giving higher priority. But I've asked Daniela Radici, the relevant assistant mayor, to review this, and we will make those changes. I'm absolutely certain. But also, it's got to be properly scrutinised, because we have to make hard choices between different needs. But this one is clearly an absolute priority. There's been reference to selling some homes. Yes, we're selling some less inaccessible, less appropriate homes. We will be building twice as many with the proceeds. We'll be ring-fencing the money to be used in the area concerned, and that we have got over 2,500 empty homes into use in the last 3 years, and we're building new council homes for the first time for 30 years.
Thank you. That's 2 questions down, and I have to say, from sitting up here, there's a sea of green cards for quite a lot of the issues that the candidates have raised so far. So that takes us on to question 3, submitted by Rowan Miller from Sarsas.
Thank you. Public health recognise the number of women and girls experiencing rape and sexual abuse in the UK as an epidemic. What will you do to widen the debate and response to make it everyone's business, including ensuring all people, young and old,
fucking council putting women in homes and prisons and fucking trying to get them to fucking prostitution and not being able to succeed?
Okay, keep going, Rowan.
Okay. Young and old people are given good information about consent and healthy relationships, and the Bristol schools proactively take on this important issue.
Do you actually want to start that again?
If you don't mind.
Do you mind?
To do that.
Yeah, go on.
So, public health recognise the number of women and girls experiencing rape and sexual abuse in the UK as an epidemic. What will you do to widen the debate and response to make it everyone's business, including ensuring all young and old people are given good information about consent and healthy relationships, and that Bristol schools proactively take on this important issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Might be a good idea to close the door at the back. Thanks. Okay, we're starting with Kay.
Hello. I found it quite difficult to come up with pat answers to some really quite complex questions, and I much prefer to work with other people. Thank you. The complex nature of violence against women and girls means it can't really be addressed by one agency on its own. Certainly the schools should take a much greater role in this, and in particularly educating the boys. That they're the ones who are the ones who are most responsible, I should say. But also, I think the police have a role to play in this as well, and I would want to work with the Police and Crime Commissioner, and in fact, together we worked out some policy details which I have here, and hope that they would take a role as well, because they will be very effective in talking to the boys in particular, if it's a male policeman, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony.
Okay, in terms of education within schools, I think it should be compulsory that all schools undertake PSHC training as part of their curriculum. We know at the moment that up to a third of girls experience unwanted touching in the classroom, and obviously that's a problem that started in the classroom, and it is likely to be continued outside. Because it needs a much wider approach to the way society works. We need to look at the way women are objectivised in the media and in the culture so often, so that they're made to feel as if they are there as objects for men's desire rather than individuals upon in their own case. I think, to be honest, in some cases some of our schools are breaking new ground. I think if you particularly look at what's happening at City Academy, with the work they're doing on female genital mutilation and on child sexual exploitation. And I think it's actually younger people in this city that are setting the standards for the rest of us to follow.
Yeah. Thank you. Paul Saville.
Okay, so under no illusion we live in a patriarchal society. I'm a man, I didn't choose to be a man, that's how I was born, but I'm largely ashamed by some of the attitudes that I come out of men's mouths actually, and I'm definitely one person that's not in with that at all. Yeah, I mean it's like it's deeply rooted as a male. I feel like because I can only speak from my experience, you know. But my girlfriend, she told me the other night that nearly all of her friends have had some kind of inappropriate touching or actually been raped, and that starts at a really young age, and I think as being a man, we're kind of indoctrinated by the system to see women as I think Tony just said about sexual objects and whatever. And although I recognise there's biological differences, I like to see us all as kind of one unity. So for me, it's about actually getting into schools and saying, that's not acceptable. Stop.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you. I think there has begun to be a bit of a shift in the way that we're taught about this, that there's more of an approach now to tell men not to rape people than to teach women to look after themselves and avoid being put in those situations. That is the correct approach, of course. It's still not perfect. There's still campaigns of real men don't do this and real men don't do that, which I don't think is exactly the right way to go about it. But we should be moving in that direction. Yes, in schools, but not just in schools. I think this needs to be taught to every generation. But I think we've also got to realise someone can come out of a lesson having been taught all the right things, walk into a shop and buy a copy of The Sun, open it up and a pair of breasts on page 3, walk down the road past any number of strip clubs in Bristol, and all the work done in that classroom is undermined by the pressures of society day to day outside. It's that we've got to address in every way that we can. Close down the strip clubs in Bristol. I don't believe there should be any and do what we can to stamp out bullying, sexual harassment at any level. Thanks.
Thank you. Paul Turner.
Yeah, this is obviously an extremely serious situation, and as Paul was saying, it's very much the male side of it that's the perpetrator. One thing I do feel is that the actual profile of what's happening hasn't been raised high enough. It's not really as high a priority as it really should be. This is something that the local authority, that the schools, the police, the NHS should be shouting about, and that's just simply not happening at the moment. So what we really need to be doing is taking this to a much higher level than it is at the moment. We do need to get schools involved, we need to get parents involved, we need to get the local authority, the police involved. But as was just mentioned, it's all very well the education in the schools, but if as you walk outside that is destroyed, whether it be what you see in newspapers or as you walk down the street, then it does kind of dampen that. So we really do need to raise the profile much higher than it is at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. George.
Thank you, Rowan. Yes, I think I was absolutely right to give this role to the Women's Commission to advise me, and I'm so proud of what they're producing in terms of zero tolerance approach to gender-based violence, abuse and exploitation. I do think that we do have to address the issue of sex entertainment, and the three sex entertainment venues in this city are an affront to a civilised approach to our approach to women. And I'm also proud that I've been part of the FGM campaign, supported the FGM campaign. That's another form of violence against women that we should be absolutely intolerant about in our society. Staff training is, of course, a very important part of it. We should be able to educate in the schools very closely. We need to use Learning City to have cross-generational education on this subject. None of us should be bystanders.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you. So I suppose I'm going to add, I think, to a lot of what's already been said. I particularly like what Tom said at the end. The multi-agency approach, absolutely, we need to be working together. Young people in schools, we need statutory PSHE, really. I mean, how long has this been going on for? 20 odd years? When I started teaching, it wasn't statutory, it's still not statutory. I have to go out and have a day here and a day there in order to teach what I consider to be the most important subject for our young people if we are ever going to tackle and understand what patriarchy is and have our young people create a society which breaks that down, quite honestly. Thanks.
Marvin.
I think we need clear, accountable and empowered leadership on this, and I think for me one of the first things I would do is make sure that the Director of Public Health in Bristol is put back at the top of the power tree in Bristol City Council so they can influence every aspect of social policy to tackle gender-based violence and abuse. Across that, we're talking about prevention. I've pledged to run a mental health intervention to make it available to primary school age children across Bristol, and in line with that is personal social health education. We need to look at support and recovery services as well. But I'll just say, just not too long ago, I made 5 pledges around women, and one of those was around nil cap on SEVs, and I had an education because the aggression that came at me on Twitter was something incredible. And the fact that we talked about 50% of our cabinet, gender pay gap, the only thing the media wanted to talk about was SEVs. And the stuff that came at me on Twitter and other women who were involved. Sexual entertainment venues, sorry. So we said we'd have a nil cap on sexual entertainment venues as a Bristol. And it really put me in mind of just how aggressive, physically aggressive, the gender hierarchy in this city is.
Thank you. Just got a couple of seconds. Rowan, would you like to respond to any of that?
I appreciate that the zero AGM campaign. I knew people were going to talk about PSHE. I think it's also older people, and I think it's not just about what happens at the moment with sexual violence is it's considered a criminal justice issue, and not enough is considered a public health issue. We don't do enough to prevent it. All we do is try to prevent it happening again. So I think it's really much wider than just education, which is really important, but there's even more we need to look at as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we're on to question 4 from Jill Noland of 125.
Women involved in street sex
Could you just put the mic a bit closer?
Women involved.
Not really.
Thank you. Is that better?
But you're going to have to put it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're done. Women involved in street sex work do so to fund life-controlling addictions, and many of them have no safe place to live and have multiple and complex needs. How will you improve the safety and well-being of vulnerable women involved in street sex work in Bristol?
Thank you. We'll start with Kay.
Oh no.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, dear, oh dear. Yeah, well, this is basically a mental health, well, a health issue, isn't it, to a large extent, but there is also the issue of security and safety for these people. I mean, that is one of the issues about sexual entertainment venues. I would absolutely support greater funding for mental health in the city, and that could be done, I think, fairly easily through making sure that the clinical commissioning group, which is responsible for NHS spending, uses its money wisely, doesn't waste it on various things that are very costly, like keeping people in hospital longer than they need to be. The same goes for, I mean, there are some great charities working on this in Bristol. St Mungo's has a great record on it. But we need more, basically, we need more. I don't know what else to say, so I'm not going to keep going. Thank you.
That's okay, thank you. Paul Saville.
Yeah, one thing I just want to address is we can all make promises about what we're going to do, but the bigger issue is that we're going to be facing massive cuts, more cuts from the central government. So it's important that we actually look at what we can actually do and get the money so we can actually do what we're all talking about. The big thing at the moment in Bristol, as many people may or may not know, is the spice problem, which is increasingly taking over the heroin and crack problems on our streets. And it's an awareness thing, but also we need to. I believe. One of my plans as mayor would be to build. I don't know what else to call it, but at the moment it's called transformation centres, where people can actually go and rebuild their lives. And I think 125 already do that sort of idea where people can go and have a cup of tea, and that's the provision that I would like to see. So people actually feel supported in a sisterhood, if you know what I mean. So thanks.
Thank you. George.
Jill, first of all, big admiration for 125 and all the work you do. I've taken advice from you and the Women's Commission and many others on this issue. It's an incredibly difficult issue to deal with. I think, first of all, national legislation, obviously we need to campaign for national legislation that ends demand. And I think it's really important that we look at the state of the woman in this, and that we decriminalise the woman's position in this as prostitute, and that we criminalise the men, and particularly the pimps, the controllers, the drug dealers that control this, that are completely unacceptable. And I've been looking at the Swedish and now the French model that is going to be really interesting to see how the French model works out. But I will be working closely with Sue Stevens, who I hope will carry on being the Police and Crime Commissioner because she cares so desperately about this, and also bringing it to the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you. I think you know, a lot of the issues that you raised will be dealt with by lots of different teams of housing, health, addiction, issues like that. I think, you know, firstly, we need to fight to win the proper funding for each of those individually, but probably also in the case of street sex workers, there's the case for having a specific council team that looks to provide a link between those different services where they're needed, so people don't kind of fall between the gaps. I agree with the preventative measures that need to be taken in terms of addiction, but also in terms of saying it's not okay to buy sex. George said correctly, go after the pimps. I think that's right. I think the people traffickers as well is another issue related to this. I think it should be illegal to buy sex, but not to sell it. But I do appreciate that's not the position of a number of sex worker groups who think it should be completely decriminalised. So I think there's a conversation to be had around that, I guess. Cheers.
Thank you. Tony.
Okay, a couple of things to add to that. Tom mentioned the human trafficking. We still have slavery in this country. We have modern slavery, and the majority of women that are trafficked into this country for modern slavery are trafficked in for sexual purposes and sexual exploitation. And that also is the case for a large number of children that are trafficked, some as young as the age of 3. We need to clamp down on trafficking in all its manifestations, but we also need to be aware that some of this trafficking is happening here in Bristol, and is people being trafficked from this city to other parts of the UK. So can we not just think of it as just being a problem to do with people from overseas? Also, in terms of looking after sex workers, we also have to be aware of the way the sex working has changed. What we now have, we have lots of sex work is happening behind closed doors, where people have access to mobile phones, and the calls are made by their pimps via mobile phones, and often the worst forms of abuse takes place behind closed doors. We need to make sure we are prepared to tackle what goes on behind closed doors as well.
Thank you. Marvin.
So I see the dangers on a number of levels. One is about immediate violence on the streets, the ongoing health dangers that come from the use of drugs, and mental health trauma that comes from having to sell sex on the streets. And I think for me, it's about working with organisations such as yourself and that network of voluntary community sex organisations, as I said, who are increasingly, as local government finds its legs cut from beneath it, going to be absolutely essential to the way we do business in Bristol. I spoke to a number of women that you work with that would drop in, and again, one of the top priorities coming out of it was having a way out when the women were ready to move, and that was about homes and the inconsistent response they had from the housing services in Bristol. No predictability, dependent on the person that picked up the phone, which led to the idea that we need priority housing. That's point number one. We also need to tackle trafficking, obviously, as everyone has said, and I just want to go back as well. We need to make sure that health professionals sit at the top table shaping every aspect of social policy in Bristol.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you. I think what I would like to add then to that is the importance that the voluntary and community sector get longer term contracts. Those of us that have worked in the voluntary and community sector, this is a long term issue. If women are going to exit sex work, it's going to take quite a long period of time to build those relationships, and those organisations that are doing that need to be secure that they're able to maintain that, and that they can come out the other end, and that we can be successful. I think that's a really important point to make. The bit around kind of drug and alcohol use, I think it's also important that we get underneath the trauma that these women have experienced that have meant that has led them to this addiction. And we know the statistics around street work, around the numbers of women that admit to having been abused themselves as children, and it's about getting under the root cause of that for me, and the police, the immediate safety, and making sure we're working with our police forces so that the women that are actually on the streets tonight, because some of them will be there, are as safe as they can possibly be, and they are treated as the victims that they are. Sorry.
Thank you.
Paul Tony.
Yeah, I think we also need to understand that those that have created the problem by forcing the drugs onto the women in the first place, in order to create the addiction that gives a circle around having to use sex in order to fund the addiction. We do need to decriminalise the women in this situation, because that doesn't actually help them. We also need to create a safe environment for them, so that they do feel that there is someone they can turn to, and a door that can actually allow them out of the situation they're in. There are a number of addiction recovery units across the city that can be of help from the addiction point of view. But I think if we can hit that, if we can hit the addiction point of view, take away the potential need, then that will go a long way towards helping solve the problems. We do need to make sure that these people have somewhere they can go, not just as a secure environment, but actually places to live that are actually theirs, and that they can actually call home.
Thank you. Jill, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, a lot of you have spoken about increased enforcement around purchase of sex, but hand in hand with that has to go with an increase in the support to the women. And Marvin mentioned routes out. Absolutely, it's about providing quality routes out. And Christine mentioned the voluntary sector. We're needed. We're here to provide those routes out for the long term. It can take a lot of years to support women out of this lifestyle.
Yeah.
So yes, while we're criminalising the purchase, we have to be increasing the support to make sure the women are safe while they're out there, because they still will be out there. That's where they're getting their money. And just to be aware that when with increased enforcement comes increased in violence towards women on the streets. That they do go hand in hand, so it does need some thought around when it comes to how we enforce on the streets the law.
Thank you. Still. Right. Question 5, submitted by Jo Benfield.
Thank you. Bristol is a city of sanctuary, and Bristol City Council, to its great credit, has voted to condemn the destitution inflicted on many seeking refuge here by past and present government policy, and to give support where they can to alleviate the hardships these policies cause. How would you direct the widespread public goodwill in Bristol generated by the refugee crisis towards a problem of forced destitution that many asylum seekers face? This will be an increasing problem among women and children if the immigration bill, currently in its final stage through Parliament, comes into force. This bill will deny many families even the meagre support they're presently receiving. That's 50% of what's considered the breadline. And of course, they will continue to be denied the right to work.
Thank you. George, we're starting with you this time.
Okay, thank you, Jo. I'm proud that we're a city of sanctuary. We have to make that real. I've asked the government, and this is vitally important. I'm ashamed that we are taking so few refugees, that we should be not taking 20,000 over the next 4 years, but at the very least, if we're to average it across Europe, we should be taking 50,000, and 30,000 of those should be what we call economically active or able to go into education. And the matter of forced destitution is one that we have to share between the City Council, the voluntary sector and the private sector. And it's something that I'm absolutely determined that we do. We've been nominated being the kindest city. It's the proudest thing I have, that we're the kindest city. I watch ever since that nomination and have noticed roundabouts of kindness. We've got to turn those roundabouts of kindness into managed kindness, and so that we really, really do help. And I will do everything I can to make quite sure that this city lives up to its name of City of Sanctuary.
Thank you. Christine?
So there's national issues that need to be lobbied, and I want to see the next mayor working with our MPs so that those areas that are going through the legislation going through Westminster, we can help to reverse this. And I feel that under the current administration, we've not seen enough of this. Bristol it's raised its head on the national stage, but actually I want to see some more lobbying around some policies that are happening in Westminster that are impacting on our residents. And then we've got what's going on at a local level in terms of the actual people that are living within our communities and within our cities. And that's about bringing people together. It's about putting out positive stories about them. It's about making sure that we protect our community spaces so that those people can engage with and get the support from our voluntary service sectors and our city council, and that we keep it at the top of the agenda and we give them the positive support that these people need. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
I think in terms of what the mayor could do directly, then we're looking at providing the housing, the health, the other support that's going to be needed for refugees when they arrive in this city. But I do agree that the mayor can use the influence of their position to try and say more about national policy as well. And I think it's important to get the measure of someone's values. I'm pro-refugee, in favour of the right of asylum, but I also think importantly anti-war as well, and stopping the problems that are really causing people to flee their homes. I mean, Joe mentioned widespread goodwill towards refugees. I think there has been an improvement on this, but that doesn't quite tell the whole story. And the reason why is the issue of immigration is used to divide and rule. By politicians that are taking away from you and I, they're then saying, oh, don't blame me, blame this other guy here, he doesn't look like you, he doesn't come from the same place that you do. And we've got to ensure that there's funding for everything and all that we need in order to cut across that dirty game. Thank you.
Thank you. Marvin?
I think a political crisis needs a political and an economic response. I think the first thing we should do is have a proper assessment across all our services in the city as to how much capacity we actually have. And that means across housing, accommodation, it means our support services, across our health services, and local government support services in the education system as well. And then approach government with an evidence-based, with a piece of evidence that said, this is our capacity, we do have the capacity to take people. And then we share that story with other core cities as well, so we have a collective response. We do not allow the government off the hook, as Tom said, of playing poor people off against poor people. I think too, there is a responsibility on us to reframe the debate. The bunches of migrants type dialogue that happens at the national level is absolutely disgusting. I think lastly, I would just quickly say there is a piece of work to be done on whiteness. I think that for some people who are afraid of diversity and difference comes down to a failure to address security in their own sense of Englishness and whiteness. And if people are more secure in their own national identity, then hopefully they'll be more open to the idea that just because someone doesn't look like you doesn't mean you are less you.
Yeah. Thank you. Tony?
I spent a few days volunteering over in Calais, working in the refugee camps. And when I arrived at Calais, the most noticeable contribution that you could see from the British government was a barbed wire fence designed to keep the refugees away from the port. The most notable contribution you could see from British people were hundreds of volunteers working and hundreds of tons of clothing and food and other supplies that were being made available to the refugees who are in those camps. I've spent time with the refugees. There are people over there who are doctors, there are people over there who are architects, there are people over there who risk their lives being interpreters for the British Army in Afghanistan, and when we pulled out, we left them behind. What's happening is that Calais is shameful, and as a country, we need to make sure our government is aware that we're ashamed of their approach to this entire problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Turner.
It's going to be fun, isn't it? It is very much a national issue. We do need a mayor that's going to be going down to Westminster and banging on doors and making a noise about this. we need to make sure for refugees that when they come into this city that we do actually have accommodation for them, that we can give them health support, and that we can actually give them a welcome. It's going to be extremely daunting for people coming to what is going to be not only a strange city but a strange country with strange cultures, languages and everything else. So making sure that they have a welcome, making sure that they have support, making sure that community sort of comes together and supports them is a good idea. I'm all for it.
Thank you. Paul Saville.
Well, as a proud anti-war campaigner for the last 10 years, yeah, like, I mean, all the green cards pretty much show us that everyone supports the idea of inviting refugees into our fantastic city. But on a practical note, you know, we're just briefly, you know, we've been talking about the housing crisis in Bristol. It's okay sitting here and telling you, oh, you know, we'll invite loads of refugees, which I am completely in support, but where are they going to live? It's okay saying that, but when it comes to practicality, that's another thing. We talk about the kindest city. I don't know what that means, and it means different things to different people. But yeah, on a practical note, you know, it's not, like I say, there's 1,000 empty buildings right now in Bristol that we could go and open up tonight for homeless people, for women trying to escape domestic violence, or people escaping conflict situations in the Middle East. Practical solutions and practical suggestions are what we need, not just a talking shop of people saying this is what I would do. Because that, we don't just want words, we want actions, and that's what's important to me. Activism is about actions. Thanks.
And Kay.
Well, I actually agree with that, with the last statement. Hot air is great, isn't it? But how many refugee families have actually arrived in Bristol? I mean, at the last count, it was it 8? 20 people or something? Three families, okay. Well, that's shocking, isn't it? And we do need a mayor who will actually take action over this and knock on doors. It's absolutely, we should be supporting families who are desperately in need. Particularly, we should be supporting the children, the large number of children in these camps who are separated from their families. They are extremely vulnerable, and a large number of them have already disappeared. And that's a stain on our society, as far as I'm concerned, and is a complete and utter, oh, I can't think of a suitable word. It's appalling. It's appalling. Thank you. But practical solutions is what we need. Absolutely.
Thank you. Joe, are you able to come back very quickly on that?
I agree, it's a stain, it's a shame, shameful. 9,000 people are estimated to have drowned in the Mediterranean, 60% women and children. With the 6th richest country in the world, there's billions in tax evasion. We can't afford to do it. I do think it's important to have a mayor that lobbies with MPs against parliamentary policies. But there are, what I wanted to say was, how do you direct the goodwill that there obviously is in Bristol? There are warehouses full of things that people donated. Any time, you can look around Bristol and there will be fundraising for refugees in all sorts of ways and all sorts of places. The goodwill is there. It's how do you direct it, as well as government policies. How do you direct what is already here in Bristol to people here who are destitute? And I think you took in a Syrian refugee, George, but there's lots of people who will do things like that. But you need to advertise it, you need to publicise it in the Post and in the media. You need to say, this is how you do it. And that isn't there for people. Also, there's things like the Transport Fund, which enables destitute asylum seekers to get free bus tickets. I have got a collecting tin. If you go out, Tom, just go out and talk to people. We were on Stapleton Road for about an hour. We collected £350. People just passing by on the street and outside the Jamia Mosque in an hour. There is goodwill if you go out to people. So I'd like, it's political, but it's practical, something practical as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to question 6, submitted by Pam Trevithick.
Hello. What will you do to reduce the gender pay gap in Bristol, which is wider than elsewhere in the country? Thank you.
Right, starting with Christine.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to see, first of all, starting with the council, I'd like to see them obviously not exposing individual names, but I want to see how many women are at the top, what wages are they getting, how many women are in part-time employment. I want the issues around gender inequality and pay gaps are something that public sector organisations should be recording, and they should be holding themselves, and we should be able to hold them to account. I think that also then would go into the private sector, and until organisations are able to collect that data and reflect it back to themselves, I think it's actually hidden from, because if the people at the top are actually full-time, mainly full-time, and they're mainly male, they don't necessarily recognise that the structures that enable them to get there are those of patriarchy, and that's why the women are much further down the bottom and they're on part-time hours. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Turner.
There's absolutely no excuse for a gender pay gap whatsoever. We do need to lead the way at the local authority. We do need to make sure that we do not have a pay gap, a gender pay gap at the council. We do need to make that very public. One of the roles of the mayor is to actually go out into the private sector and start knocking on doors and saying, well, look, this is what we're doing in the council, we're sorting that out, prove to me that you're sorting it out as well. And that is what I think we need from the mayor, is to actually be going out into the private sector. Once we've got the public sector sorted out and said, look, we've done it, you can do it, show us that you're doing it. And we need to, as Christine said, make that public as to whether it is or is not actually happening, and maybe doing a bit of naming and shaming.
Thank you. And Paul Saville.
So it's not just about money for me, it's not just economy and cash, it's actually, I mean, one of the points I read about in the Bristol 24/7, I think, was about the giving women like time off for periods and stuff, which I think is really important as well. It's not just about giving people more cash. I don't know where to go with this, to be honest, if I'm really honest. Yeah, I haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but it's going quite quick, this. But yeah, I mean, Christine touched upon like the stuff at Bristol City Council and things. One of the big things in my campaign I've been talking about is how Nicola Yates has taken more money. I'm interested in taking away from the bosses, like I said, and then bringing it back to the working people. That money up there could be given to local groups, local communities, and everyday workers. Thanks.
Thank you. Tom.
Cheers. I think, it's 50 odd years since the Equal Pay Act, and it's not a reality still, and that is a disgrace. But I think what it shows is that legal change is not the same as real change. We can win something from the top on a piece of paper, but we've got to go out there and fight for it and make it a reality. I think, the approach I would take would start with the council. The approach has got to be one of raising women's wages, not in the name of equality cutting the pay of some male workers, as has been done in programmes like Agenda for Change and stuff in the past. But I would like to see the council have a minimum of pay of £10 an hour for all members of staff and look to push that on to workers beyond the council as well. I'd like to see the publishing, as has been said, of what the pay is for the people at the top, so we can compare and see what's actually happening. But also I think, we'll need to reverse the privatisation of some of the services, so we do know and have control over what's happening. For example, academies, I think, don't have to be part of, academy schools don't have to be part of national pay bargaining, so they can set the rates for individual teachers, and they can get away with paying women less than men if they want to. So I think, defence of strong national trade union pay bargaining as well.
Okay, thanks. A little bit of extra leeway there. Tony.
Okay, I think some of the things to look at is we have some situations where even where there's a majority of women in the workforce, they are still paid less than men. So, for instance, 3/4 of teachers are women, but they're still paid some £3,000 less per year on average. I think when we're dealing with public agencies, the council can use its procurement process to give points and allocate points to companies that publish their gender pay gap and also reduce their gender pay gap, and also allocate points to companies who have at least 50% of their board members being women. Also, we need to tackle some of the early parts of this in the way that often careers are gender stereotyped, where women are often, or girls are often directed into roles such as adult social care, whereas boys tend to be directed more towards engineering and manufacturing and so on, where often the pay is higher. We need to change that right at the beginning. At the moment, we have 80% of girls going to adult social care, 80% of boys studying physics. That needs to be reduced.
Thank you. Kelly? Yeah, I'm really surprised at this because we've had equal pay legislation for a very long time. So a part of it is as Tony said, women are directed into low-paid jobs, and I fail to see why a care worker is worth only £7 an hour and a banker is worth millions. Millions. There is something really wrong with the values in our society, and that's not going to be easy to address, but it needs to be. So the council has influence, the mayor has influence, and I would use that influence to the best of my ability to make sure that we value all the women in jobs in Bristol at whatever level they are. I've had experience of this in staff management in various organisations, and it's something I would absolutely promote. Companies that are breaking the law need to be prosecuted, and I think that's something that a priority. Thank you. George.
I can't decide how many women there are on the City Council, but I can decide how many women there are on my cabinet, and I've made quite sure that they are that is 50%. I'm able to influence the people at the top, and the person at the very top is a woman, and one of the other strategic directors, Alison Comley, also, and they influence the City Council. They make quite sure that we do have fairness as much as is possible across the City Council in terms of paying conditions, and if anybody has any evidence to the contrary, I really welcome you bringing it to me, because I want us to lead by example. But I referred to my Fairer Bristol Business Charter. That will be about getting business across the city, employers across the city, to recognise the importance of this issue and to make quite sure that that is given points in terms of any appointments, any commissions, and in terms of social value. And moreover, I want to make quite sure that we do achieve our aim of moving down from 13-to-1 pay ratio, which what it was when I came in as mayor, down to the 10-to-1, which it nearly is now.
Thank you. Marvin.
I think the thing about looking at discrimination, the most dangerous form is not when you find an evil individual orchestrating it, but it's just the way a place works culturally, and it's patterns that repeat themselves, and it makes it very hard to grab a hold of. But just understanding what we're actually up against is just very important in the first instance. But I would say what we can do is clearly we can make sure we have our own housing order in Bristol City Council. We can extend that practice and that responsibility to other public sector organisations in the city. And I think we can really pressure the big private sector employers to be transparent. And I think the way to do that could be to really working through the Women's Commission to be able to publicly name and praise and shame organisations that do and do not live up to this. But it's also about the wider structural inequality that women are directed, because the gender pay gap is at the senior level. We've got to talk about women being redirected into lower paid jobs in the economy as well, potentially becoming an ethical care council.
Thank you very much. Pam, do you want to say anything? But very briefly, time's really rushing on.
Yeah, I started my working life as a barmaid, a cleaner, a factory worker, and but for the birth of the women's liberation movement in the encouragement of women, I would not have found my way to education and a different kind of life. And I think too few women find their way that way. And one of the difficulties we have, which hasn't been mentioned, is our appalling class system in this country. It affects men as well as women, but it particularly affects women. And the greatest vulnerability I faced, as I became older, was actually becoming a mother. Because as soon as I became a mother, I couldn't do the two jobs, to rear my children and work. And until we get some justice around the right for women to work, and the loss of status that women achieve when they go to work, in terms of their career structure, we have absolutely no right to waffle on about gender inequality in the wage labour field, because it's rampant everywhere and it has to be addressed at every level, including women coming together. The largest group in the trade union movement are women right now, and the only way that women are going to tackle this issue is by coming together with wonderful organisations like yours. Thank you.
Okay, so now is the time where we ask our candidates to tell us for a maximum of 1 minute anything that you think you haven't covered already that you might like to tell us about. You don't have to take the full minute. I'm going to take the names out of the hat, so we'll start with Paul Savage.
Cool. So what I've been doing over the last 6 months, well, since October, been building my manifesto. It's a people's manifesto. My ideas are around direct democracy. I want to see more inclusivity in the democratic decision-making processes that go on in Bristol. So I'm just going to read you a few out if you like. So we talk about Bush Respite Centre. We need to reinstate the funding for the Bush. I'd like to see St Paul's Carnival happen this year, and it will receive full funding. Stop BCC selling off our council housing. Introduce a rent tax. If more than 70% of councillors oppose something the mayor is proposing, it can be quashed. Stop giving bosses at BCC 20% pay rises. No more hotels in PS1, there's enough already. Introduce a new Bristol tax on corporations trading in our city, with a tax gain given to small start-up businesses started by Bristolians, i.e. Vodafone, people like that. Rename the Colston Hall based on a popular vote of Bristolians. There's a few of them. Ask me if you want one.
Thanks very much. Kay?
Well, again, this is about leadership, isn't it? It's about setting priorities. It's about making sure that what you say actually turns into action. And that's a really important point. I'm a very practical person and I get things done. And it would be working with the experts in the community in every field, so everything from women's voices to minority groups of every sort, and that's what I would want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
Okay, first and foremost, my pledge is to implement this manifesto, which is the Women's Manifesto, to the greatest extent possible. Second pledge is that regardless of how many women councillors are elected, my cabinet will not only have at least 50% of them being women, I will also be delegating power to them so that they can actually bring their expertise into the cabinet. Third thing I will implement, something which I should have mentioned earlier, is we are a city of sanctuary. That needs to be implemented to a much greater degree, but we also need to work with the various groups in Worcester, such as Worcester Refugee Rights, Worcester Cali Refugee Solidarity, and we need to create a broad refugee and asylum seeker strategy with somebody, a paid person at the top, to actually coordinate all the efforts that's being done in this city. And there's well other things that we could go on and pledge to do, but the one thing I've learned most from tonight is that people like you need to be listened to much more than they've been listened to in the past if we are going to make any sort of difference.
Thank you very much. Tom?
Well, I said at the start, we don't want to limit ourselves just to stopping things getting worse. But even that is taking a struggle in this age of austerity that we do need to have that fight, that we can put the needs of women and ordinary people in general ahead of those of the billionaires, big business and the bankers. But we do want more. Our idea of a needs budget, reversing the cuts that have been made, would only be the starting point of that. We can look, and I've mentioned some of them, at what other services the council can provide. But also, I don't just want to look at the specifics of a particular service to ameliorate this or that problem. We've got to look at the system that causes that problem in the first place, one that oppresses women, and that has to change. A society of capitalism is one that's based on profit, on inequality, on oppression. I don't think that can ever deliver equality for women or for anyone else. That's why I'm a socialist, why I believe in a different type of society, and that's what I'm fighting for. Thanks.
Paul Turner.
I'm 100% behind the right to work for women and equal pay. I'd also like to see the role of a mother much higher in our esteem in the society. It's one of the most important roles in our society, and women should be praised from those lines. What I'd also like to be doing is bringing a lot more accountability and prioritisation of spending of your taxes into the council. There is very little accountability, and the prioritisation, as we've heard from some of the other speakers, is woefully off the mark. And we just need to have a better run council. It's not that difficult to do, and we need strong leadership from the top, not just here in Bristol, but somebody who's prepared to put their head up nationally to say, no, we're going to put our foot down and say this is wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Marvin.
I think the first thing I'd say is it's about the tone of leadership and understanding that women's equality is not an optional extra that's tacked onto the end of our big strategies with an equality impact assessment when all the real business has been done. It is the real business. Secondly, I think we'd just like to acknowledge the reality that many of us sit at the crossroads of many drivers of inequality. When we're talking about sitting at those points of intersection between gender, race, class, and we actually have to recognise that the multiple discriminations people can face. Thirdly, I think this is about leadership. I'm committing to 50% of my cabinet being women, implementing the Women Manifesto. I want to secure the future of the Women's Commission, and I'm looking at a cabinet lead specifically around women's issues in Bristol as well. And I think there's another question that we need to ask is, what kind of leadership does Bristol need? Leadership does not come in one style. Okay? It can listen, it can not listen. It can rule, or it can incorporate and include. And there's a big question beyond all the pledges, around all the pledges. How does the person what type of person do you think needs to lead Bristol?
Thank you very much. George.
Thank you, Benny. I want Bristol, the name of Bristol, to be synonymous with equality of opportunity. I want us to be proud of that. I want more women in positions of influence. We have started that. I want to be able to work with women in a way that's practical for them, which is why, for instance, I have a job share on my cabinet between Fee Hants and Daniela Radici, and that is the only one that I know of in the country. I want to make quite sure that education is about learning across the board about the particular issues that women face. I want more women in activities, in sport, and I want to continue to support those campaigners who are making Bristol a much kinder place, such as the FGM campaign. And I want to make quite sure that I am judged by my actions. I promise you I shall do everything I can in my second term of mayor to support the Women's Commission, as Penny knows I've done so far.
Thank you. And Christine.
Okay, as I said at the beginning, I'm standing because I really wanted to make sure in this election that education was on the table. We have inequality, it is structuralised and it's institutionalised into the state system, and this needs to be an absolute priority for the next mayor. And the reason for that is because it doesn't actually matter where it is that we have those intersections of inequality that Marvin was talking about. If we separate our children on the basis of their parents' affluence from the age of 11 and increasingly from the age of 4, not only are we trying to push something up a mountain, it's going to cost more, it's going to take longer, and in the meantime we waste, the potential of hundreds of children is wasted. I'm not sat here to say I necessarily want to be the mayor or I want to get your vote. That isn't what I'm asking. What I'm asking you to do is, regardless of whether you said you knew who you were going to vote for or not, ask that person what they're going to do and how they're going to challenge our schools, and hold them to account so that every secondary school, particularly, and primary school in this city serves its fair share of the children that are of our city. Thanks. Thank you very much. Right, so that more or less brings us to the end, but not quite. If you've decided who to vote for, raise your green card. Thank you. If you've made up your mind as a result of what you've heard this evening, would you raise your green card? Okay, thank you very much. Now I would say, don't forget to look at our War Manifesto. We will be holding all those authorities to account through our War Manifesto, and keep an eye on our website and we will let you know how they're doing. And we will be holding the elected mayor to account, what's more. So we will, let you know how we're doing on that one as well. Now, so it remains for me to thank our candidates who, how many people were here nearly 4 years ago when we had the first Mayoral Hustings? And I wonder if you think the discussion tonight has actually been an improvement on that, the discussion 4 years ago. Interesting. And I would like to thank our volunteers, because as ever they've been wonderful and made the event work. I would like to thank this really great audience, and remind anyone who hasn't signed up to Bristol Women's Voice, please to do so, and please to complete your evaluation forms, and to also remind you that we have hustings for the Police and Crime Commissioner on Thursday at 12 o'clock at the Unitarian Chapel. So thank you all very much.